Anne Hawkins. And today we're carrying on with the series that I'm doing with members of Drive the Network on the impact that their business has on the wider world. This is in response to several comments that we've had about how bigger businesses are making life and the world in general harder than it needs to be, simply for the purpose of pursuing even more profit. And the business owners that I work with are very much of a different mindset to that. They're mostly working in an area where they make their decisions. They're working in an ethical manner. They're working in a way that they're trying to make the world a better place, not just through their business, but in the wider world in general. And today I'm joined by Martyn Sibley, who's spent several years, quite a few number of years, doing exactly that. So welcome, Martyn. Thank you for joining us today. And I understand that on Monday, well, a couple of days ago, you were at the House of Lords giving some of this message about disabled entrepreneurs. So perhaps you'd like to start by telling us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, Anne. And yeah, so I guess the trip to the Lords was, I think I've been there two or three times the last couple of years now, very much around, as you say, the disabled entrepreneur kind of conversation and some work that's been going on there, which has been really, really interesting and exciting. And it's my involvement is off the back of, as you say, a few years of working around disability inclusion has definitely been the sort of mission and purpose that has fueled a lot of my career and professional endeavors and a couple of ventures on a entrepreneurial level. So I think for me personally, that sort of through my lived experience of being a wheelchair user, having social care funding and a couple of people that support with my care needs has obviously framed how I get about day to day and some of the barriers that I face in personal and professional life. And so I think there's been a real building up over time of, well, where someone like I having these barriers, why are there these barriers? Why are there sometimes steps and no ramps? Or, why is it even just attitudinally people maybe see someone like me in a wheelchair and have preconceptions or stereotypes as to what that means? And so from my experience to that kind of extrapolation of other disabled people, it's been a quest to sort of work out, we hear this word a bit more lately, but the systemic side of exclusion of disabled people in different parts of life. And so obviously that, by its nature does lead into a semi-political part, political conversation and definitely an economic conversation as well. And so, yeah, I think through that journey of like, how do I and all the people doing it in my community build a more inclusive world, the solutions I've really come more and more to is to not accidentally create a silo of saying disabled people should be included, which is true, and no one would generally disagree with that. But there are all sorts of different people in different communities that are excluded in lots of other ways that aren't due to disability. And I think that's where I've been at more clearly recently is, well, if everyone is included, everyone benefits. And there's a sort of line I've been using about societies thriving when everyone is included. And so we sort of bounce between a very, very macro philosophical point like everyone's included, everyone wins. But to the point about the House of Lords, the whole focus there was that with small and medium enterprises being the backbone of any economy, and knowing that about one in four people have a disability in the UK, and I think there was actual research done on business owners specifically that one in four business owners have a disability. There's a really rich conversation about if we remove the barriers stopping disabled entrepreneurs having their businesses launch and flourish, there's benefits to the individual having the purpose and the income and all of those things. There's the benefits to their business thriving because it creates jobs and it creates tax revenue and all that kind of economic stuff. And that's when it leads back into society's winning because you've got more SMEs doing more innovative and great things for customers, all that kind of stuff. So sort of bouncing between various different topics here, but at the Lords, I just couldn't have imagined being invited to that kind of place and those sort of conversations when I started out work-wise nearly 20 years ago. So I think it does show progress and positive momentum. But then in the room, there are still lots of disabled entrepreneurs with lots of frustrations and challenges, and there's still further to go, even though big businesses and big government are engaging in the conversation maybe more than they used to in the past.
Mm. Yeah, a really good point. And I remember talking to you before about the fact that it was, right from when you were a small child, having access to a powered wheelchair, being able to go to a regular school, being able to go to university, being able to study and start work in London, start your own business, sell a business, start another business, employ other people, and all of that is something that just wouldn't have been possible unless some of those barriers had been removed.
Yeah,
And as you say, if that could be a more universal experience for people, um, that the whole of our society would be much better
yeah.
for all the reasons that you say. So the where this has led you to was is starting the agency Purple Goat. So do you want to just fill us in a little bit on the idea behind that and what inspired you to get to that point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's obviously that big narrative of disability inclusion and that recent clarity of the more the dogs just come to say hi as well. The
Hello,
photo
Sunny.
bomb, Sunny indeed. Um, yeah, so I think that, and then that recent clarity of kind of bringing disability conversation in to a societal everyone wins stuff is all great. And it's, if I'm delivering a keynote or creating content like that, that's been great to have some of those frameworks. But at the same time, well, partly you need a tangible vehicle, if you like, just for how I can earn a salary from all the work I'm doing. So there's the like personal need to have the work and the income. And Purple Goat has been the business I started. I'm founder CEO for over 5 years now. In terms of what Purple Goat does in the world, it's the understanding that there's a lot of marketing and advertising in the world, and there was a stat that 0.06% of adverts featured disabled people when we started. And I think it's barely up to 1% even now compared to some of the research and stats differ a little bit, but you're talking 20-25% of the population have some kind of disability. Obviously, that isn't just myself as a wheelchair user. There's different subsegments such as blind and visually impaired and deaf, hard of hearing, neurodiversity. But that point about barriers is the way to focus on it. That whatever someone's disability, it's just about how they can still have their own goals and pursue their own life's path without barriers due to the disability. And that's having like universal design and co-creation to overcome that. So with Purple Goat, the main point is that where brands spend their ad budget on all sorts, TV, radio, social media, we're a way to help them connect with disabled people as consumers, but also via content creators, disabled content creators. So you've got that authenticity and ability to sort of target and reach more specific audiences. So as you can tell, I'm now getting into my marketing patter, but it's important to say we're not just coming at it from disability inclusion. We are marketing professionals, and we're so it's the brands are paying for a general marketing agency service, but the business case, the value proposition is that they can grow their business by having more representation of groups that historically weren't involved in advertising and marketing.
Yeah, yeah. So you, obviously the focus is on a visible disability because that's how people recognize that kind of thing. But there's also the invisible
Yeah.
disabilities as well, isn't there? And but we were talking earlier about how the World Wide Web has helped so many people,
Mhm.
and that they've been trying to be more inclusive since about 1997, I think it was. And I know that you personally have used lots and lots of things that most people would just take for granted to help you function in the world.
Yeah.
Things that some people would now regard as AI, but they've just been bits of technology that have been around all the time. And I think this is an area where your work impacts a much, much bigger section of the population, doesn't it? It actually does make life easier for a lot of us who don't regard ourselves as disabled, but
Yeah.
just we're a little bit more hard of hearing or a little bit less mobile than we used to be, or a little bit needing stronger glasses or can't see in the shower or whatever.
Yeah.
And all of the, as you say, talking about inclusive design really does impact a much, much bigger section of the population.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so obviously my disabilities are very affects me physically. So technology has been huge. Obviously, electric wheelchair. I had my first wheelchair when I was 3. I have a sort of machine called a hoist that lifts me, and so they are, very sort of the technology in a very mobility supporting way. But then as time's gone on, the laptops and then smartphones and then being able to speak into my phone and it actually becoming closer than ever to getting what I'm saying, whereas in the past it would be a bit frustrating because it would get all muddled up and not quite hear what you were saying. So like voice to text, all those sorts of things for me personally have been very enabling and empowering. And I've got some smart home setups where I can turn a light on with my voice using the smart speaker, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that starts to cross over from a lot of that beyond the wheelchair and the hoist, the other more consumer tech enables me to do things I couldn't do previously independently for myself, but it's often now tech that everybody is using. And I think I'm right in saying that Siri, the Apple, the bit on Apple, which I'm an Android guy, so I'm not as like directly involved, but that was actually developed with disabled people, like for disabled people, but then realized that this is actually really beneficial to everyone. So yeah, exactly, that's your point. The sort of tech that is all in our lives often is created for disabled people, or at least very early adopters are disabled people, and then that expands. And I think that's a narrative we don't often hear because, as we know, disability can be a bit, you're either a Paralympian or it's all about welfare debates and cuts. But there's a very middle of the road stuff about being at home with the family and having your job and going on the odd holiday that doesn't get told enough. But yeah, that sort of stuff is really like an important point of that win-win-win that I keep banging on about more recently.
And when we talk about taking it not necessarily away from the working environment, but expanding into a wider community, you have a couple of other organisations where one of which where you're working with change makers. So would
Mhm.
you like to just mention that a little bit?
Yeah, so I've sort of, with that, as we said earlier, that bigger purpose mission stuff clear now. The three areas are the Purple Goat, the marketing agency. Purple Changemakers has really been my personal content on my personal channels and my personal blog. But that has evolved, particularly the last year, into coaching and advising. Change makers is quite a broad term. We were chatting earlier, weren't we, about the word influencers, and some of these words get a bit subjective and a bit woolly and almost cause as much confusion as helpfulness. But my definition of change maker is a social entrepreneur or social activist. So I'm, from all my nearly 20 years of change making in my way, I've been able to distill the lessons and the strategies and pass them on to these other social entrepreneurs and other social activists. And it, leans more into disability because of my background and my network. But I also do work with people making change that isn't necessarily disability related. And then the Purple Collective, I suppose the easiest way to describe it, it's definitely not for profit. And it's almost where Purple Goat is relying on the brands to want to do something and have budget assigned. There's lots going on. You could call it market failure from an economic perspective, where theoretically demand and supply sorts itself out. But actually, there's demand, for example, for hoists in hotels. So I mentioned my hoist at home. If I stay away, I need a hoist, but barely any hotels have hoists, even though there's 250,000 people use a hoist. So demand and supply is failing that market. So the idea of the Purple Collective is to raise awareness of these market failures and where disabled people are being let down, very much with the collective voice of disabled people, but also families and allies. It's very important again and again. Inclusion is inclusion. It's not the silo of disability. And so yeah, gradually, by raising awareness, networking with politicians and big businesses and designers and innovators, we can come up with solutions to problems that previously weren't in existence.
Yeah, yeah. And when you talk about change makers, how do you identify those people?
So you mean beyond the kind of social entrepreneur,
Mm.
social activist? I mean, yeah, but the social entrepreneur would be like I'm a non-exec director for Open Road Access, who there's wheelchair accessible vehicles. I stay in my wheelchair and I go in more like a van than a car, but with a ramp by staying in my wheelchair. And there was no offering of flexible rental hire of such a vehicle. So David, who's the founder CEO of Open Road Access, is a change maker. He's a social entrepreneur. His Open Road Access is a business, and there's a part of it around profit or certainly financial sustainability, but it's also very mission driven to close the transport gap about the number of journeys that aren't taken for disabled people because of the societal systemic barriers I was talking to earlier. So David is definitely a change maker by this business that tries to address the lack of transport options for disabled people. And
Mm.
then another option would be Shani Danda, Dr. Shani Danda, um, picked up that a lot of people getting access to work, which is a funding support for the sort of if someone needs a bit of equipment or certain help physically in their job, from like a care support worker, that funding enables the person to still do their general job. And it was coming out that they were slashing everyone's budget without any announcement or consultation. And so she set up the Access to Work Collective to hold the government accountable. So she's more in that social activist camp. I'm not directly advising Shani officially, but we're friends and colleagues. But she's a great example where it's not a business like David with open road access, but it is taking stuff in that way that affects disabled people working, which is also quite contradictory to the government point about getting more people into work. But let's not digress too much there.
Yes, yes. Let's we'll be here for a lot more than a lot more than half an hour if we go there. Um, so, but there's a whole other slew of people, isn't there? That need to be involved and could be involved. People like me, who can see the benefit of you being as active as you are, as effective as you are, and also have friends and family members and all the rest of it who would benefit from a lot of the things that could be better. So how can we, as a much wider section of the population, get involved in helping to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have chatted about this the last few months, and it there is a challenge to it because I think part of me wants to say, and it's correct to say that if everyone was to get behind, say, Shani's campaign about access to work or my campaign about hoisting hotels, when I talk to a member of parliament or hopefully one day I'm going to get a reply from Premier Inn or Holiday Inn, despite best efforts, they haven't replied yet. So if there are people who aren't necessarily affected by it, but care and want to support this kind of stuff, there is value in numbers of people just saying this is wrong. I want to live in a world where this doesn't happen, and I'm behind whatever the solution might be. I want it to happen. That is great. The challenge we have in the modern world is that can lead into like signing a petition, and then there's so many social issues, unfortunately, that are all vying for all of our attention, that there's a point at which that doesn't actually really help all the causes or be simple enough for the imaginary person that you're kind of speaking on behalf of, or indeed the listeners and the people watching this, not even imaginary people. So I think there is having awareness and caring is definitely the first step. Like ignorance is not bliss. So I think that's first step is be aware of these things, but then don't get stressed or overwhelmed by them either. Um, and then I guess it is just like as you're going about your everyday life and you come across things, there might be times in your personal life or in your professional life, like within a role of a business or whatever it might be, that again, that sensitivity and compassion and empathy of, well, is there a tangible thing I could do now that would remove a barrier for a disabled person if we hone in on that prism? Because that's my sort of personal perspective. I don't know if you've got any thoughts we've discussed over recent months on top of it, because I don't want to not give people tangible actions, but I am just very aware of the reality that we can't all day, every day put a pressure on ourselves to write these things as an individual. But I definitely think there's awareness and collective voice is definitely something that feels like it's got teeth as we kind of figure this out.
Yeah, yeah. I think the difference for me is, and as you say, there are many different issues, different pressure groups, different minority groups that need support and all that kind of stuff. The difference for me with the disability issue is that any one of us can become disabled at any point,
True, true.
either temporarily or permanently.
Hmm.
And I think that's why it makes so much more sense for us to work together on that,
Yeah,
because it does affect all of us. It's not something we can put to one side and say that's not my deal, that's not my
yeah,
issue, that's not my concern.
yeah.
It really is, and has to be.
So I think
And
if anyone's wondering why, you've hit the nail on the head. That's why we should care about this topic. To the how, I think everyone has to just have that self-reflection of, is there somewhere in everyday life, like when you maybe in town and there's something you notice, like there's a step and you're curious if they have a ramp, should someone in a wheelchair want to enter the premises, you could just inquire kindly and, politely and about that. Or in your job, maybe someone is like a software designer, and they decide to take an extra course to check that they're up on the latest accessibility considerations when they build the next app or the next website. So I think it's hard to give that this is the way, but it's for everyone to have an inner reflection of what one or two things could I do in the next month that would actually help accessibility and inclusion. And if everyone did that, we'd be in a very good place.
Or wouldn't we just? Yeah, I guess it is the frustration that we have as individuals, isn't it? Like not being able to read the label on the shampoo bottle when you're in the shower,
Mm.
or flip the top open, or reading a book where you would really want to have the audio book and an online version. And if you're watching a video, you really want to have closed captions so you don't
Mm.
disturb the people around you. It's those kinds of things that we kind of take for granted as every day, but very often don't act on them. We kind of
Yeah,
say, "Oh, I wish I could," or "I wish they would," instead of saying, "What can we do about this?"
yeah,
And finding the people who are responsible for those designs and
exactly.
getting involved.
There, because you referenced at the top of this chat, the businesses that more pursue profit, but then other things go by the wayside. And so I think whether we're disabled or not disabled, everyone being aware is, as I've said a few times, that awareness is a lot, but then it is who is the gatekeeper that decides whether to mandate closed captions, for example. Like that then becomes the focus point of the conversation, is getting a Google or a Meta in this very specific example to do something above and beyond around inclusion and accessibility, even if it cuts into the profit margin a bit, which Purple Goat's whole narrative, though, is that even if you invest in accessibility, you'll make more profit down the road because you're involving more customers anyway. So it shouldn't actually be bad for the finance, but that's often where people go, we would do it, but it's going to cost too much at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. So is this where the Purple Collective comes in? I mean, if people like me or people who are concerned about this stuff and want to actually do something about it, but aren't necessarily disabled themselves and not involved in different organisations, is this an access point? Is this where we can come together and talk about this kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there will be an element of the collective where those directly affected by the challenges are going to sort of speak to what the problem is and our ideas of the solutions. But yes, absolutely, it's not like only for disabled people. And so when, as I say, when we're taking hoist in hotels, I've got a meeting with Daniel Francis, who's Labour MP for Bexley-Heath. I think he's got a family member with a disability, and he's become quite vocal on disability topics without being in a role. Like the actual Minister for Disabled People seems to be making life harder for disabled people, but this Daniel is really great. So yeah, to be able to say the collective has X number of members and is all behind this, it is sometimes literally as simple as people being part of a collective. The collective is a very powerful way when you're speaking to those gatekeepers.
Okay, great. Well, we'll put all the details of the Purple Collective, Purple Changemakers, and Purple Goat in the in the show notes. And
Purple is the color of disability for anyone that doesn't know that.
yes, yes, absolutely. And is there any anything else that you want people to be aware of? Any other way that people can get in touch with you, or just anything that you want to say in closing, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if there's specifically around the change making social entrepreneur activism side, that's definitely just me on my own channels. And as a general, just I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram and all that sort of world. And I've got martynsibley.com where my blog is. And obviously, if someone's got a specific interest around Purple Goat, that's got its own website and channels. And the Purple Collective, it's purplecollectiveglobal.com, I believe, but we can triple check that after. It's definitely Purple Collective Global. And yeah, obviously, if they've got questions, people can reach out anytime.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much for joining me,
Thanks a lot, Anne.
and exploring even more of these exciting ideas. And I'm sure that the impact that you have already had on the world is enormous, and there's going to be a lot more to come. So thanks very much, Martin.
Thank you.